Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to
Hi.
the stream. This is me and our guest today, Tyrgannus,
hmm
and we'll just jump right into it. So, this constructor has experience with the whole gamut of puzzle genres and variants, boasting over 1,000 puzzles created in his career. He has a reputation of being a lightning fast setter, placing first or second in his first three speed setting competitions. He has 10 full length CTC features and a number of GAPP features, which is genuinely approachable pencil puzzles. Just like our last guest, Jovial, Tyrgannus is one of the setters for genuinely approachable pencil puzzle series, which is a series on Discord where you get genuinely approachable pencil puzzles. I'm just going to keep saying those words that are really hard to say together. Everyone, please welcome Tyrgannus.
Hey, everybody.
How are you doing today, Tyrgannus?
I'm doing pretty well. No, it's as good a day as any. Had a breakfast, did some
Nice.
shopping. I'm here.
Impressive. How's everyone in the chat doing? I see lots of names I recognize. Tallcat, Naverio, Peter Venus, Logan Wall, David Ratner, Kodak F Jam, Align, Ambrose, Ishtus. Welcome everyone. Sorry if I missed someone there. Anyways, let's get right into it. So, Tyrgannus, what was the first puzzle that you ever set?
Okay, so I'm going to give you an unconventional answer for that. So
Okay.
the conventional answer is a pretty bad thermo
Uh-huh.
with givens and not even symmetrical placement and a very robotic, ugly solve called Parallel Degrees. It's the first one I put in Sudoku testing. Submission on the CTC Discord. It's generally not a good puzzle, and I would say, yeah, this guy.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's far worse than some of the other first puzzles that have been brought up. But in some ways, this isn't my first puzzle. I thought about this question and I was thinking outside the box. A lot of people have been answering with Sudoku, and I think that, people primarily are um, people primarily are well versed in Sudoku in this community, and that's borderline an expected answer. But I
Yeah.
started asking what a puzzle is, and something that has reachability and connectivity deductions is in some ways a puzzle. So, as
Okay.
silly as this sounds, my first puzzles were Mario Kaizo levels.
What is Mario Kaizo
That's
for those who don't
oh,
who don't
okay.
know?
Mario Kaizo is just really, really hard custom Mario levels.
Oh,
And
okay.
yes, you can make puzzles out of them. You really
Hmm.
can.
So, what is it? What does a Mario level have to do with connectivity or what was
Uh,
the other word you used?
Reachability. Yes.
Reachability. Okay.
So the questions you have to ask yourselves in something like uh, in a lot of pencil puzzles is how do I link this clue to
Mm-hmm.
this, or how does this dot reach that, or how does the loop reach here? Well, in these Kaizo levels, sometimes like, how do I make this jump? And it's not as obvious as you think. It's not just go fast to jump. It could be get the power block, jump the power block, throw it on the bouncer, get onto the bouncer, do a spin onto the thwomp, and then you can get to the ledge. That's a puzzle. Those are deductions.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. That's that sounds crazy.
I would say
Um,
those are my first puzzles.
so when you go about setting in a Mario Maker, uh, I know Mario Maker is a thing. Is that sort of what you're talking about, or is it
Yes, that
different?
is what I'm talking about.
Okay. Um, when you go about setting a Mario Maker level, do you find it similar to how you would set a puzzle, or is it a completely different process that happens to replicate deductions and logic in that way?
It is mostly different, but there are
Hmm.
similarities.
Okay.
Namely, one of the similarities, it is mostly different.
Yeah. Okay.
One of the main similarities
Expected.
could be, hi, I'm trying to go for an aesthetic theme in this puzzle.
Right.
What could I even put here that gets me from point A to point B? Whereas, hi, I'm going for an aesthetic theme in this Kaizo level. what enemy do I put here that I could bounce off that gives me enough momentum? That is
Hmm.
a similar thought process, actually.
And just before we get into everything, and before we get past the first like little bit, I do want to ask chat if the beeping is gone because I've stopped the noise suppressor. I see that my base level is quite a bit higher than it would normally be. So I'm wondering, is the beeping gone, and is there background noise when I'm talking? Because, or when I'm not talking as well. You hear some background noise? Okay, I think I am okay with the beeping as long as there's not background noise, so I'm gonna put the noise suppressor back in there. Okay, I'll do a different noise suppressor, so we'll see how that works. You would hear a high pitched tone. Okay, so it's not the noise suppressor. Great. We've isolated this, that it's not the noise suppressor. Okay, perfect. Good to know. Noise suppressor fixed that. Okay, so it's definitely not the noise suppressor that's the problem. Okay,
Hey,
okay.
productions.
And thank you for the small interlude. Okay, let's get back to the Sudoku part of it. So when you set this
Yes.
thermo parallel degrees, why did you decide to set something like this?
Okay, so I would say F Puzzles was linked in a video. I forgot which one, and this is early on in F Puzzles development. Very early on. It might have been the first time it was linked in the channel type early on.
Hmm.
And it was linked, and I played around with F Puzzles for a very, very long time before I even went to Discord. I found Discord confusing, actually. I'm old. It wasn't intuitive to me. So I just played around with this and just had fun. Um, but it was Mitchell Lee's Thermo very specifically that was like, oh, dude, Thermo is cool. And this is roughly 10,000 times worse than Mitchell Lee's Thermo, but you got to start somewhere.
Right? Yeah.
Um, yeah, and very obviously, I just drew thermos in the grid that were symmetric, and
Hmm.
then I just place givens until it's solved. It is about as uninspired as it gets, but that is, I guess, the thought process behind it.
So when you created this, did you think like, wow, this is easy. Like you just have to place these thermals in the grid, and then and we put in digits, and it's resolved. And oh, what a great puzzle! Or did you think like,
No, I didn't think it was even good at the
or were you
time.
like, oh, okay, this is just my first attempt? Like,
It's closer to that, yeah,
okay, yeah,
closer to that. Um, I don't know if you bake souffle, it's not going to be amazing the first time. Like,
yeah,
but you got to do it.
yeah.
You
You
still
have to
got to
do it
do
the
it.
first time to figure out how to do it the next time.
Exactly, you still got to do it.
By showing these first puzzle, I don't mean to be like the first puzzle you will make is garbage. It's more like everyone has to start somewhere, and this is where we
Yeah.
start. This is a relatable thing that everyone has to go through. And
Mhm.
when you said it at the time, you probably thought, this isn't great, but uh, like it's pretty cool when you set your first puzzle. You're like, wow, this is how things work.
Yeah, it's fun, or
Yeah,
it should be fun.
definitely. So when did you said you got in, starting setting this by through Mitchell Lee's thing and through F puzzles, but obviously you started watching CTC before that. So when did you first start watching CTC?
I want to be like I think so many people are going to say this just because it got blessed by the algorithm gods, and that is I
Yes,
do think it was the miracle Sudoku. It,
I as well. Yeah.
yeah, I think it was. Um, it's funny because people like I think statistically the Sudoku with four given digits is the most viewed, but I don't hear many people citing that as the first thing they've seen. So
No,
I know those numbers are true. You can see it, but I know like 10 people that started from the Miracle Sudoku. So
at least.
at least 10.
Um, had you solved pencil puzzles or Sudoku or variant Sudoku before you saw CTC, or was that sort of the first time you saw this whole
I
space.
lack balance in my life in many
Hmm.
areas, and believe it or not, there's a question later that I know I was asked that touches on that. I lack balance in a lot of areas of my life. So I found Sudoku in 2008 after a bad breakup, and it became a coping mechanism for me. And by the time that I got around to watching the Miracle Sudoku, I had solved between 10 and 12,000 Sudokus in my life.
Interesting. Were they all
Yeah,
sort of classic Sudoku or?
almost entirely. The
Right.
first time I ever saw a variant was Killer, and that
Hmm.
was probably 2016. That way later after I started.
Right.
I was like, whoa, you could do something other than just have digits? What?
Whoa. These digits are
Unbelievable.
smaller and they're in cages.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
Killer was like the only thing I'd ever seen other than classic. Well, okay, I'd seen irregular, I'd seen Sudoku
Yeah.
X, like diagonals, I'd
Hmm.
seen Killer. I'd seen different sizes, like 6 by 6, 12 by 12, 16 by 16. That's it, though.
Right.
That is all I'd seen before watching CTC.
So did you feel like your scanning and basic Sudoku skills were a lot better when you first entered this community than other people could might be?
I feel like that's a trap question because I have to say yes, but that just makes me look arrogant. But yeah, because
No, it's
it's just experience. It's a numbers game. I just had
yeah.
solved more than average, I think. So, and to this day, I am way not the fastest. I'm not even the fastest in the country. Um, so like, there's
Yeah,
so
of
many people that
course.
are faster than me, but I can keep up. I'm a
Hmm.
decently quick solver.
Nice. I had solved a lot of Sudoku, like a lot of Sudokus before. I don't think I've counted, but a lot of Sudokus before CTC. But I have never developed sort of a fast nature, so it's good to hear that other people have. I mean, obviously you're sort of a video gamer and you do things fast. I'm definitely not the
Yes.
fast person. So, um, how long did it take from setting your first puzzle to get your first CTZ feature?
Might actually have the longest break
Hmm.
um, from at least the interviews so far, which is only 10 now, but it was
Yeah.
6 months for me.
Oh.
Um, and I can cite two people in those 6 months I think influenced me a lot. Yes, that is my first feature.
Yes.
Uh, One of them I don't think is too surprising. The other I don't talk about enough, and that's my bad. So the less surprising one is probably Kodak. I talked to
Hmm.
Kodak a few times that time, and it was very obvious. And this is such an amateur setter thing to say. This is such a beginner setter, but it's like, oh, I want to get featured.
Yeah.
And I definitely was like, oh yeah. And I did throw some puzzles at him, and I do think that some of the advice he gave me helped. But
Right.
if I'm being honest, one of my big inspirations was Lucy Andren because she would just draw a really cool puzzle on the grid, just a really cool picture,
Yeah.
and it still had a nice solve path. And the puzzles were generally easier, twos and threes usually. But that blew my mind because that was actually not a common thing to
No.
do. I almost think it's more common now than it was.
I I distinctly remember I think Lucy made a setting video, and she said that one of the puzzles that was really popular from her catalog was this thermo spider. It looks like a spider. And she
Mhm.
said one day she was drinking and she came home from the bar or something, and then she was like, "Oh, I'm gonna load up F puzzles and I'm gonna set a puzzle." And then she just drew that into the grid, and she's like, "Whoa, this is really cool," and then went to sleep and then woke up the next morning and she's like, wait, this is actually really cool. I thought it was just like I just did something stupid when I was drunk. Um,
I've been
so
pleasantly
I thought that was
surprised by
great.
several of how good the solve path was when it was like clearly a picture.
Yes, definitely. So I think that's great. That definitely had an impact on me as well in terms of like, oh, you can just set like by just doing it. Like what?
Yeah, it really kind of lowered the barrier of entry to
Yeah.
me because I was trying to, again, this is another rookie mistake, I think. Not that you can't do this, but
Hmm.
I was I really wanted to make these hard puzzles and really intricate puzzles,
Yeah.
and I succeeded sometimes, but
Hmm. like the one on screen.
It was refreshing. Well, this one's this was hard by 2020 standards,
Right.
totally. It wouldn't be considered as hard today,
Hmm.
but yeah, this was a 66-minute video. That's because Mark made a mistake. This
Oh,
should be a
okay.
45-minute video. Like, it was a pretty big mistake. It should
Well,
be a 45-minute video.
it is phrased as Simon gets his revenge, so I'm assuming it was perceived as a very difficult puzzle and something that Simon was like, "Oh, here you go, Mark. This is approachable."
If you know the story behind it, Mark sent Simon Chaotic Roggen by
Hmm.
Under Beyond, and in response, Simon sent this to Mark.
Right.
So it does tell me that it was one of the harder ones in like their
In the
testing at the
bucket,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, in the bucket.
Well, at least one of the harder good ones. I'm sure there was a lot of hard puzzles that were not meant to be featured.
Yeah.
How did it feel after 6 months of that sort of initial I want to get featured sort of newsletter feel to get featured? Was it like yay, or was it like finally? And it's just because it was
Validating is the
hard.
word I'm going to
Validating.
pick.
Yeah.
Yeah, validating because uh, I kind of suspected that I could do this, but by 6 months, most everybody that started when I did that was as prolific as I was had been featured. I
Right.
was one of the later ones in that batch, if you
Hmm.
will. So it did feel validating because, again, this is so hard to convince. I understand the drive. I really understand the drive to get featured. And it's so easy from my position of being now featured double digit times to be like, you shouldn't care about being featured.
Right.
But I do understand it. I wanted that. And it was getting a bit demoralizing about November. This was in January, by the way. I
Right.
think that's a common question you ask. I don't know the day. I just know it was January. I don't know the exact day.
January 14th. A surprising number of people know the exact date, which I'm always surprised of. Yeah. I
I know the
would,
month.
yeah. I don't even know if I know the month, honestly.
I know the month mainly because I thought I had something pretty cool. This was set in December, and I sent it to them right when I said it. So
Mhm.
it had been in the pile for a while. So that was actually part of the reason I remember that it was January, I suppose.
Right. Um, so obviously
I do
you're
apologize for anybody watching. I know I bob my head a lot. It's really hard for me to stop, by the way.
it's okay. I if I watch back, I'm always like
It's
doing
like a
this the whole time.
stim,
Yeah, yeah.
very specifically. It's hard for me.
Um, so obviously that was 6 months into your setting process, or maybe a little bit less. But uh, do you still feel good about that puzzle? Like, are you still proud of that feature that it was showcased in that way?
Yes. So I can only think of four-ish puzzles that use the difference of three negative constraint in all of CTC's feature library.
Right.
It's not a common
No.
thing that people do. Scruffy might have had a good one, by the way.
Hmm.
So I'm
I think I
not
might remember that.
I'm
Yeah.
not the only one.
Yeah.
Uh, but that I don't know. I really like that because if I got featured with a killer, a thermo, an arrow, that would have been cool. But I did like that I got featured with something a bit unusual.
Right.
I mean, it's got
Yeah.
little killer. That's weird.
A little bit of novelty, right?
A little bit.
Yeah. Um, so describe in a few words what your setting process is now and how it's evolved over time.
Well, I'm not really trying to impress anybody anymore. This does not mean that I don't care. It does not
Yeah.
mean that I don't try. But for the most part, nowadays, I would say I set what I like to call contest plus puzzles, where they're almost in the style of contest puzzles, but they're more difficult than you're going to find in most every contest.
Hmm.
Before, I was trying to set to impress,
Right.
and there is some overlap. I'm not going to pretend that they're completely 100% different, but that
Yeah.
is a pretty big shift. Now, that is to say, every now and then I get an evil idea and I have to make it. because it's less that I'm trying to be evil and show off now, and it's more the idea is there. If I don't make it, it's gonna haunt me. I have to get
Yeah.
it out of my brain. I have to make it. So I do apologize for stuff like pestilence. I had to make it.
Um,
For those who don't know, pestilence. This is a terrible, terrible combination of rules. Is little killer palindrome disjoint group, and
oh
it's a
no.
5.
Oh, okay. Okay, so sometimes you have an evil idea. You're not really trying to impress people. You set sort of a contest plus puzzle. What is a contest puzzle like in your opinion?
Okay, so a contest puzzle. This is going to sound so funny because I have never participated in a contest. However, and this is public knowledge, I'm
Yeah,
not revealing anything. I have been the tester for several contests.
interesting.
And I couldn't even tell you which ones. It's usually Sam or Prasanna. I think Backpow's done it once. Has just like sent me a contest and like, "Hey, do you want to test this?" I don't even ask what it is, so I literally couldn't even tell you what years or what. I don't know. But I've solved quite a lot of contest puzzles, and to me, they're usually they're clean. They usually have a logical theme. They're
Hmm.
often, but not always symmetric. They're usually hard twos to low threes.
Right,
They're very clean too, and because they're designed to be to reward people that are knowledgeable in variant Sudoku.
right.
So because of that, it's actually not really in a contest setter's interest to make really novel logic because that doesn't actually reward knowledge. That
Hmm.
rewards intuition,
Right.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, um, usually it takes already known deductions and puts them in really cool ways that you might not have seen, but it's still a familiar deduction.
Right. Or I see a lot of, at least the puzzles that I've solved with you, you tend to combine rule sets and use pretty standard deductions to complement both rule sets together. Like
Yeah,
Andy King, Renban, for example. Like that was
I
very
like that puzzle.
complementary.
I
Yeah.
even know which one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ninth Court, I think, is one of my better break-ins from someone that doesn't usually focus on break-ins. I think it's one of my better break-ins. That's the puzzle meme was referencing.
Yes, this one with Anti King and Renban. It's a very good puzzle. So contest plus would be a little. Is it just a little bit harder, or is there something else to that
It's
definition?
mostly difficulty, I would say,
Hmm.
because if you found a way to take this puzzle and make it easier, whether that's a few more givens or a few more ren bands,
Hmm.
maybe. I don't think this one looks quite clean enough. This one is a bit more LMD bait,
Right.
if you will, but it's not too far off.
Right. Okay. So which puzzle would be a perfect example of this style?
Time Twister, even though it's like my latest,
Yeah.
because that that really is just like a contest puzzle but harder. That's exactly what that is.
All right. Well, if anyone wants a contest puzzle a little harder, Time Twister. Okay. It does look very clean. So and I guess clean in your definition is like the look of the puzzle, or is it the feel through the solve?
60% look, 40% path.
Okay. Interesting.
That's me personally. Some people probably heard those numbers and were like, no, but you know.
Table flip, like what?
What?
Um, okay. I know that you, speaking of your style and the puzzles that you like to make, I know that you are sort of someone who very much likes the irregular Sudoku sort of deductions. What about irregular interests you so much?
All through college, I'm answering the question. Just it's not going to sound like I'm answering it for a couple
Okay,
sentences.
that's fine.
All through college, I was really insecure that I
Okay.
couldn't solve a Rubik's Cube, and I was too prideful to ask anybody any methods or look up any methods. Because, I mean,
Okay.
the internet was definitely accessible. There were definitely guides online, even by the time I was in college. That's 2007. Yeah, there was definitely guides, but I was too prideful, and it was quite difficult for me. And eventually, and I mean years later, which is embarrassing to admit, I solved it, and something just like clicked that not only could I solve the Rubik's Cube, but I could solve every single twisty puzzle in existence. Some would take me a long time. I got one called the Eitan Star that took me like 3 weeks. But
Hmm.
yes, I've never been stumped by one ever again. Uh, Now, this is less brag and more, I think, I don't know. I think I found some correlation to shapes and odd geometry that I've been able to take into pencil puzzles, Sudoku being one of the primary ones. But believe it or not, a lot of my gaps also have weird looking regions. I even joke
Right.
about it in the intros. So, yeah, I learned a lot from Rubik's Cubes, not just the cube specifically, but twisty puzzles. And I just love it. I just love weird shaped stuff because you'll find out that the structure, the format, is more similar than it may look. It looks jagged and wonky and chaotic and what's going on, but at the end of the day, it's still a Sudoku. You're still 90% familiar with it, even though it aesthetically looks so different. It's so cool.
Interesting. I can just imagine you sitting in your college dorm room or something, just staring at the Rubik's Cube, like, tell me your secrets. And eventually you're like, you're just a cube. You're not even that weird. Like, I
Yeah,
understand
I
you.
couldn't I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to orient the last edges on the top
Hmm.
layer. That problem alone took me over a year.
I still don't understand how to solve a Rubik's Cube first. So for someone like me, what made it click? I'm just wondering.
Okay, yeah. So here's a basic thing, and I actually think this is partly how you can take this into regular Sudokus. That
Okay.
is unwittingly a really good question. So if you want to swap pieces around in the
Uh-huh.
late stage of a solve, the early stage of a solve, you don't need to be that careful. You just put
Right.
things in. In the late stage of a solve, if you put things in, you'll often break your progress. So what you have to do is you have to manipulate part of your solved grid and hide it into a safe orbit. And from there, align the things that need to be switched into a single orbit, move it, and then retrace your steps except for all the move its, which is weirdly similar to how leftovers works. I'm being
Hmm.
serious. Because in leftovers, um, what I'm trying to find out is a commonality, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to see certain cells. So you could consider hiding uh, outlining regions that semi line up, and you could say the altering move would be taking out the rows or columns.
Okay.
And I generally like leftovers way more than set, even though, and this is going to be a controversial take, it is set.
Right. I mean,
Leftovers are
it is.
set.
Yeah. It's the simplest
However,
set.
I think that if you know what to look for, and by that I just mean if you've just solved a lot of irregulars, to
Mm-hmm.
me they're a million times easier to spot because all you need to look for literally is are there any regions that more or less take up multiple rows or multiple columns? If
Right.
the answer is yes, that's a leftover. That's it. You don't need to think any harder.
Right. Um, I noticed Robert Holbert, which is a funny name actually. I didn't even realize. Says in chat, when I think about solving, I look at it like geometry too, which leads me to Jovial's question, which was, what is geometry in puzzles? Like, what even is that?
Okay. So I'm not going to give a perfectly satisfactory answer, mainly because I'm not positive there is an objectively simple answer to this
Hmm.
question. It's used differently by different people.
Right.
I suppose if there's a commonality, it's going to be a non-arithmetic deduction that is often done by looking at, I don't know, sets of cells
Mm-hmm.
and what they see in conjunction.
Right.
So I tend not to think that a single given is ever geometry because it's just one cell. It's not in conjunction with anything.
Uh-huh.
However, that's some people will. Some people will see that as a geometric deduction. To me, one of the hallmarks would be like taking a thermo
Mm-hmm.
and then taking the bulb or the tip, taking it out of a house, and
Yeah.
then putting the rest of the bulb or thermo
Into
in
the
that
house.
house. That is a classic. You could do the same thing with arrows.
Right.
Usually, only if it's the circle of the arrow. The tip doesn't give you quite as much information.
Mm-hmm.
But what that does is it eliminates it off of the rest of the thermo. It also eliminates it in the house that it's literally in. It's amazing how powerful that clue is. You can have 4-cell thermos that just destroy and break puzzles when you set them up like that.
So in a way, I think you're saying that geometry is deductions which limit the value of cells in relation to other cells without using arithmetic.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Pointing is the classic term
Yeah.
because everything that I said is going to set up either pointing pairs, pointing triples, or pointing quads. I
Right.
suppose even higher in like 16 by 16, but we don't need to go there.
What? Okay. Um, yeah,
But
we don't need to go there.
pointing points exist technically.
Pointing points. Okay. I really don't
We're
want to go
talking
to
about
Joe.
sauerkraut. Oh
uh,
yeah, Wessel did ask. Oh no, it was Stark. I think asked
yeah,
about sauerkraut.
Starcast about sauerkraut. I'm not sure if that was a joke question or relevant question, but
It's a Jaffa cake question. That's fine.
it's a Jaffa Cake question. And if you don't know what we're talking about with that, go watch Clover's interview. It's great. After this, of course, you want to finish this, of course. Uh, I don't want to ask Jovial's other question because it feels wrong to ask two questions in a row, but we're already talking about mastering Rubik's Cube, so I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Jovial is great, so she asks great questions. Knowing you, though this applies to all your hobbies, what to you indicates a true mastery of puzzling? Do you feel you have attained it?
Okay, so slight moment of vulnerability, but I think to people that know me better than just know me as a person as opposed to
Yeah.
just as a setter, this is not going to be surprising. And that is, I come off as confident, maybe even cocky sometimes, but honestly, I'm very insecure.
Okay.
I'm very insecure. So I don't like to not be good at things
Mm-hmm.
because the moment I'm good, I think that I'm adequate.
Right.
Yeah. So if I am interested in something, I have to pour myself into it on almost an obsessive and compulsive level in
Right.
order to even show myself in a public place and space about that. Uh, yeah, I'm quite insecure. So yeah, that's true of most aspects of my life. Either I don't spend much any time at all in it, or I've poured myself into it. It's usually
Mm-hmm.
one of the two.
Right. Uh,
Do I feel like I've attained mastery? No, I don't. I actually don't think anybody's attained mastery. Maybe Persona, but like even then, it's a maybe. Like I don't know what that means. What
I
does
don't know either.
mastery mean? I don't know how to
That's the
answer
question.
that.
What do you indicates true mastery? You don't know what it means?
Well, you could do anything you ever wanted in a puzzle that
Yeah.
is by definition possible.
Right.
Obviously, there are some things that aren't possible. They're just broken, right?
Yeah.
So you
I
can't do
mean,
that. But
you can
you
still do a lot
can
of broken things.
in any rule set that you can think of, you can do it exactly as you want, with the setup exactly as you want, and control the solve exactly as you. That's mastery, and I don't know if anybody's. I don't know if anybody's done that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if anybody's done that. That's perfect.
I mean, it's
I'm
almost,
probably putting mastery on a pedestal, admittedly.
I almost feel like you have, the setter in a puzzle has so much control over, uh, well, maybe they don't have that much control, but some setters have a lot of control that maybe they have mastered it. If you can sort of master or control the entire solve path. Maybe that is sort of the level.
I know what you're saying, and I even was kind of hinting at that.
The
I'll tell
appearance
you
of
into
control,
it.
that's a good point, Kodak.
Yeah, so something that is really hard for me not to. I think it's hard for almost everybody. Oh my gosh. I think this is just a difficult thing for humans to do is not move the goalposts on
Right.
what is considered good or great or masterful. Because okay, so let's say you've never said a Sudoku,
Hmm.
and then you're like, I just want to make something that's unique and human solvable. Well, then you can do that consistently, and you realize, well, that's not that good. Maybe it is. You've moved your goalpost. So
Right.
then your goalpost is like, okay, I want it to be perfectly symmetrical and have a novel idea. And
Hmm.
that's really far off for you. But then you get there, you do that, and you're like, well, that's
Right.
not that hard. Other people could do it. So you keep moving these goalposts. Really hard to say.
So speaking of a goalpost, I feel. Oh wait. Now there's another question about mastery. Okay. Well, and geometry. Oh, this is a perfect question. Tallcat asked, more so than any setter I know, you have mastered, you have a mastery of geometry in your puzzles. Do these kind of deductions come naturally to you? Is this just how your brain is geared in this way? I feel like you've already answered this with the Rubik's Cube thing, but if you feel like you've missed anything, and he
I
says, what appeals to you about these deductions as well?
have an anecdote to add.
Okay.
I hate to bring him up even twice. I don't want to embarrass him. But a long time ago, Kodak said something about when setting a puzzle that he bifurcated a lot to see the possibilities
Hmm.
of a certain puzzle, and
Right.
then would make a puzzle so that you didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
And I can't think of the last time I used set outside of leftovers in a puzzle that I actually wanted a solver to use. It's really not my style.
Hmm.
When I set a puzzle, I am constantly using set. As weird as that sounds, because that's my
Hmm.
way of I bifurcate so you don't have to. I use set so you don't have to. And I'm literally just trying to I'm trying to find stupid deductions. And then, like,
Okay.
okay, the grid kind of wants to put a three here. It's not perfectly forced, but it really wants to put a three here. The real decision then is do I put a three there or not? Because both are valid in different, if you're going for different things.
Hmm. Interesting. That is quite a good anecdote. And what I was going to ask before that, when I said the tall cat question, was that one of the sort of, I don't know, goals that you could set is to find a symmetric grid, which has very asymmetric logic, which Woofer has brought up that Wild Pop-Tart has this property of being very symmetrical, but sort of anti-symmetrical in terms of its logic. So uh, what was your process in setting that?
So you can think GAPP, literally,
Okay.
because it's real common in pencil puzzles in multiple genres to have anti-symmetric clues.
Hmm.
Mashu being probably, or Mashu, I don't know how to pronounce these
Mushu.
things. Mashu, whatever. Mashu is probably the most common with this, but there are certainly others.
Hmm.
Kropke isn't. There's a lot. I don't need to get
Yeah.
into everything. But anti-symmetry means that uh, if there's a clue in an area, the symmetrical placement opposite that clue will be the other type of clue in a
Hmm.
binary clue system.
Right.
So that is exactly what I'm doing with Wildberry Pop Tart, and that actually is the secret to get an asymmetric solve. So what you want to do is pick rule sets, and this is actually why Kropke and XV are like this. You want to pick rule sets that have generally stronger clues and weaker clues.
Hmm.
Because if there's similar clue strength, that's one of the worst things that can happen.
Right.
Okay, so V's are way stronger, crop key, black dots are way stronger, and it naturally gives you that push and pull throughout the solve. So in my opinion, you may disagree, but just working with these two, I think Renban is the stronger I think Renban is the stronger constraint here. You may disagree. That has been my experience. So the
I think that's wrong.
Renban is the push, and the region sum is the pull. Also, the givens just really help with that. I'm not gonna lie.
I agree that in some cases the region sum lines can be the weaker of two constraints. Like for example, I did a similar thing with Quasimodo's ears, using them as the sort of weaker thing, and then not Renman, German whispers as the very strong one. I very sparingly used the German whispers because I just wanted to use those to disambiguate things, and then the region sum lines was everything else.
Yeah. Whispers are more powerful than they at first seem the first time you read the rule set.
They are very powerful, yes.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So speaking of GAPP, how did that how did that come around? I know we had Jovial on last time. We didn't actually get to that. So how did that start?
Yeah, so I was in the right place at the right time, which is somewhat of an unsatisfying answer. It's true. I can elaborate, but it is true. More or less, what happened was, okay, I want to say this accurately. I don't have notes on this exact question.
Okay.
So long before GAPP, like 2 months before GAPP existed, Clover said a few times, jokingly, but not really that jokingly, it's like, it'd be really cool if there was a GAPP channel. Like, just full on said that a couple times. It was one of the biggest hint, hint, nudge, nudge, like there is. So I know Jovial and Shy started, I think they started like DMing each other. It's like, I think we could do this. And I was messaged really early on, to the point that the first GAPP ever, my name is mentioned.
Right.
I was mentioned really early on, and I'm not gonna lie to you, it's because they're familiar with me.
Right.
However, GAPP wasn't like an absolute and utter guarantee. Just because GAS existed did not mean GAPP had to exist. So the mods were actually careful to monitor how much interest there actually was, and if it really warranted its own channel, or if it was just going to be a series that burned out in 2-3 weeks. And upon seeing that there was a surprising amount of interest, not just dozens but hundreds of solvers, that's when Freddie and Eric joined, which, by the way, was only 4 days later, and the rest is history. I am a weird pick for GAPP because at the time, I probably knew fewer pencil puzzle genres and was familiar with fewer pencil puzzle genres than you would think.
Right.
However, I don't know how to say this, but it is somewhat true. My work ethic was known. I'll just put it like that.
Yeah.
That if someone told me, hey, you need to learn 100 rule sets, I'll be like, okay. And I did. I've actually learned like 250 this year, which is, my brain hurts sometimes. I have done a lot of research this year. And I've set a lot fewer Sudoku because of it.
So speaking of non-Sudoku pencil puzzle type things, do you enjoy setting non-Sudoku puzzles more than Sudoku, or is it the other way around? Or is it sort of a tie? Favorite child situation?
Do you like teriyaki more than pizza? It's so hard to compare for me. My love of pencil puzzles, non-Sudoku pencil puzzles, started with Hayawake, and I would make a daily Hayawake if I could. I still love that genre so much, but I think people will get bored of that, so I try not to do that. I love it so much.
You could call it Hey Awake. Every morning when they wake up, they find a Hayawake. Hey Awake.
Hurts my soul slightly, but we say it's called Neuramaze. I think even Joy pointed that out. So there's no rhyme or reason, because sometimes we attempt attempt, not really perfectly get it, but attempt the Japanese pronunciation, and sometimes we just don't. So I don't know. I can't quite figure out a pattern there.
Right.
So yeah, I really do like setting pencil puzzles. I haven't set too many that are really hard. I have set some. In fact, let's bring up Steph. I'm gonna shout out Steph for a second. Steph
Okay.
made a pentominous puzzle that was a 15 by 15. It actually got featured, and that is not easy to do for
No.
a just a pure pencil puzzle on CTC. So that should tell you all you need to know. This is brilliant. It's easily my favorite pentominous puzzle, and I fell in love with the genre like that second.
Right.
And I was like, basically, teach me. So then when the 3K pack came along, I actually kind of worked with Steph a little bit. Not that it was a collab, but just learning and
Yeah.
bouncing ideas off of to build the puzzle that I made from 3K, which is just a giant Z. And I think they taught me too well because apparently this is a hard puzzle. I have been told that this is a hard puzzle. Glipperal, who set airlocks, which is also a very difficult pentominous, said that
Which
he
was also
struggled with
featured.
this. So that should tell you all you need to know.
Yeah.
I
got
actually
about
really like this.
10% through this, and I was like, all right, I don't know what to do. I give up.
I mean,
It
if
was
you have
fun.
the time,
Yeah.
I actually think it's a good puzzle. It's just ambitious.
hmm and I think you said, to me at least, I don't know if you just said it, but was that your longest non-Sudoku set? Like the amount of
Yes,
time you
but
spent?
that's mostly due to experience because
Right.
I've set a bigger one.
Okay.
My 25,000 milestone post puzzles, also a pentominous.
hmm
That's generally a larger puzzle, but I I set it faster just because I was more experienced at the time.
Right.
I
So
forgot how long that took me. It took me like 7, 8 hours, which is that's slow for me. That's very slow for me.
uh, do you think you set non-Sudoku in the same way that you set Sudoku?
I yes and no. So in the sense that I'm looking for a path, telegraphing,
Yeah.
deductions, theme, yes, but you don't. I mean, don't cook two cuisines the same way to make the same analogy. So
Right.
yeah, it's a different thought process. There is a lot of similarities to it, but I don't know. I'm generally okay. So as much time as I've spent on pencil puzzles in this year, it's spread out over a lot of genres and a lot of rule
hmm
sets. So generally speaking, Sudoku is still probably the thing that I'm most comfortable with.
Right.
Generally speaking, I'm fairly comfortable with Hayawake and Batominus now, um, but yeah, it's because it's spread out so much. So yeah, I approach pencil puzzles a lot of time trying to go from student to competent real quick, which
Right.
that is it's taxing sometimes. I have to
Right.
make a lot of puzzles that nobody's seen. It's part of the reason I've made so many puzzles. A lot of them aren't public.
Hmm. So speaking of the very long set, how long does it take you to usually set a puzzle?
Okay, I would say anywhere between 1 to 5 hours,
Okay.
with 2 to 3 being more common. The most common is two to
Right.
three. Pencil puzzles tend to take me 30 minutes to 2 hours, with
hmm
some exceptions. Ham sandwich took me 6 hours, and if you're surprised at that number, because it's a small grid, it honestly is a small grid. It's like a 7 by 7, I want to say. The reason it took me so long was I had to make it easy.
hmm
That genre wants to be hard. It's
Right.
pulling my hair out. Ugh. I learned that some genres are easier to gap than others.
Interesting.
Certainly.
What environment do you prefer to set in? This is your question. I'm using it against you. I think so.
That sounds good. So I like to set at the weird hours of the day. I'm mostly nocturnal.
Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
worry about the time. I'm okay. This is like my nighttime though. But
Okay.
okay. So I set it like 3 a.m. with a cat in my lap and no humans around. That is when I like to set. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, and I'll set it other times, but that is preferred. Do, 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 do,
To
do, 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 do.
jumping back to GAPP, I noticed that I don't know if you can answer this, but I noticed that there was a new person who posted in GAPP just like 2 days ago, Riri. Um, what's the story with that? I don't know the
Okay.
context, so
Yeah, sure.
yeah,
Um,
get an inside scoop, right?
so as a whole, what people see, especially if they're really not trying to dig,
Yeah.
is that gas is Clover, Sam, and Philip, and Gap is, let me try and get it in chronological order. That would be Jovi, me, Freddie, Eric, and Shy. I think I actually got that in the right order too. Um, however, there are testers,
Hmm.
and at this point, they're publicly revealed. They weren't for some time, but we've just thrown that out the window. There's no real need
Okay.
to keep it secret. So Zoned and
Yeah.
Riri are testers, and Shy was sick. So, and I think that for Zone's puzzle, I was out of town. So, yeah, they'll absolutely make backup puzzles. I was really excited actually that Riri got their first gap. That was really cool. It's a good puzzle too.
Yeah, it was a good one. I did it this morning. Um,
I abuse crop keys so much. And Navario, it's totally true. I've made some of the worst puzzles trying to do asymmetric designs.
hmm. Interesting.
The theme will get you sometimes. The theme will kill you.
Okay, let's go into this very interesting puzzle from Kodak. Or sorry, puzzle. Question from Kodak. I guess it is a puzzle in a way. If there's one thing that stands out to Kodak best, one thing that best describes your setting style to Kodak is uh, the way you manage entropy in your puzzles, where you have this incredible skill of adding clues that seem to do close to nothing. They hardly ever resolve ambiguities and only add more ambiguities, and yet they bring the puzzle to a unique solution with a logical path. How do you do it?
I love this question. I saw this and was like excited to answer. This is going to be a long one.
Okay.
There's no short way to answer this question. Okay. So, if there's a short way, and oh my gosh, am I going to elaborate? It's clue strength. And
Okay.
he's touching on that. That's kind of in the
Yeah.
question. Is that I
They
think a
seem to
lot
do
of the
nothing,
time,
right?
not all the time, but I think a lot of
Yeah.
the time, people try to make somewhat minimal puzzles. It's
Mm-hmm.
fairly common. And the only real way to make a somewhat minimal puzzle is to have some of your clues be quite strong. It doesn't need to be every single clue, but you need some that are
Right.
strong. And I have made strong clues. Don't get me
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Broken cello is a good example. I have like 7 length thermos, very strong clues, 2 of them even. And then the rest are tiny nothings, which is exactly what Kodak is talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I love weak clues. I love them. I have been told there have been a lot of philosophies, and people have different philosophies with setting. One of them is about having setups, key deductions, and rewards. And I very much agree with this, but my interpretation, I think, is slightly different than normal. I think the most common interpretation of what a reward is like a digit or a pair or sets of coloring, and that'll happen. I'm not going to tell you that. Yeah, I really do like this thermo. If you haven't solved it, this is a solid 4. It's not a low 4. It is a solid 4, but it's doable. It's a fun one. Anyways, sorry for the sidetrack.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, so The way I see reward is, well, actually, it's probably closer to Fistamafel. Not that I'm trying to compare him in skill level. I generally think Fistamafel is a better setter than me. But we both like to whittle things down slowly. We both like clues. And the only real way to do that is the economy of space. And this is actually the hardest part of it. Anybody can make a weak clue. Anybody can
Right.
put in a two-cell thermo that's diagonal when it's not, doesn't instantly give you digits. The difficulty is something borderline laughable if you're familiar with my setting, and that's that I have to think about the puzzle globally. It's
Right.
funny because almost every single deduction that I have in my puzzles is local.
Is local. Right.
But I have to think about these globally because it is literally possible for me to run out of space if I'm not thinking on a global term. And it is possible for me to fill the grid and not have it unique, still be like, 7 solutions. This has happened to me, by the way. It's really frustrating when it does. So, exposed. Yeah, so a lot of my puzzles, not all of them, but I mean, you can see the backdrop. A lot of my puzzles have a plethora of cells. I say that on average, I have some of the more clued cells per grid than most setters. It's all about weak clues, and it's
That would be an
about seeing
interesting
what they do
statistic.
in conjunction. Very Gurkles-esque.
Yes.
Because Gurkles talked about, I place a clue, and I don't really look to see what it immediately does, so
Right.
much as the gestalt of what that does to the grid as a whole. I look at that so that you don't have to.
Right.
That really is the answer. There's a lot of trial and error, which is also slightly surprising because I think I tend to set quickly. So, I don't know. If you're going to set puzzles, I honestly think some of the best advice is to just open up setting software, draw stuff in the grid, see what it does
Exactly.
hundreds of times. And then later, you won't need to do it hundreds of times because you've done it. You won't remember all of it. Of course you won't. But you're going to remember a lot of it. So you know what something's going to do. Even if it's intricate. I don't know. It all adds up. Yeah, its economy of space is the biggest issue. I love weak clues, but I have to find an end, which is sometimes actually the most difficult thing for me to do, is to actually
Right.
resolve the puzzle.
Interesting. Speaking of Kodak and him saying this is his impression of your setting style, how would you describe your reputation as a constructor?
I have 2 reputations, and they're chronologically sorted. My
Okay.
first reputation is this is the guy that makes weird, busy grids. Not even saying that that's bad, but I made puzzles, meme puzzles. Honestly, that's not the worst way to look at it. I made puzzles with not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 layers of Latin squares on top of each other. No, this I really actually did. I'm
Okay.
really proud of that. It's my biggest nerd snipe. It's really hard to set, actually. I made a lot of my puzzles were kind of ugly, if I'm being honest. It doesn't mean the logic was bad. That's not what I'm saying. I made early, before I even got featured, I had a puzzle called Kitchen Sink. And Kitchen Sink is an ugly grid. If you look up the archive and see Kitchen Sink, it's ugly, but it actually has a decent solve path, believe it or not. So I wasn't afraid to have ugly grids. This is a terribly ugly grid. Oh, the 6th dimension that you brought up. Sorry,
Oh.
I'm giving you mixed messages meme.
It's okay. I can't bring up the one from Discord anyway, so.
Yeah. So 6th dimension is a terribly ugly grid. So the nerd snipe in this one is not actually what you think it is. You might think, how many layers can I put in? More or less, the answer is 9. That's not the hard part. The hard part is how many grids does it take that it's completely and utterly fully colorable without any placement of geometry? Because now look at the givens in this puzzle. The givens in this puzzle it's just the top row. It's just the top row. So the answer I came up with was 6, and that's my upper bound. I'm betting you can get that much, much lower. Well, I know you can. I know you can with very specific irregular grids that are mostly lines and then bends in them. But I mean naturally, not trying to just use the pasta machine, which is the type of grid I'm talking about. Yeah, it took me 6 layers because I did this with 5 layers, and there was still a couple disambiguations that I needed.
Add just another one. Add another layer, right?
Add another layer, yeah. So the second reputation,
yeah, I do remember
the original. I do remember the original question. I think the second one is that I make clean, symmetric puzzles that use common rule sets. No, I do. It's so funny because it's night and day. Clean, symmetric puzzles that use common rule sets, but not necessarily common deductions.
Interesting.
I know. I changed a lot. I don't know what happened.
Something clicked, I guess.
Something clicked.
I
just have more fun, I think.
Does that perception like match what you think your style is, or is it warped by something?
Mostly, I was getting slightly annoyed when people called me the irregular guy because I don't have a single irregular feature, and the percentage of irregular that I have in Elm, I think I have like 2 or 3, and yeah, I have like 10 in the archive, but it is a minority of what I've made. Don't get me wrong, I love irregular and I've studied it quite a bit. It comes fairly naturally to me, but it's a minority of what I made, and that became almost a meme in 2021. Was this is the irregular guy? And I'm not angry, I'm not salty, but every now and then I was like, you know, I do other things.
Right.
So I don't. Oh, that might be it. I might have. Thank you, therapist meme rister. I think I discovered it because that actually might be why I switched. I think I switched to kind of change that.
Interesting.
I never really thought about that until this second.
So do you think because you're saying you haven't made that many regular puzzles, but you somehow got the name of the irregular guy, do you think that's because your regular puzzles left some kind of impression on people, like? Or
this is another trap question.
That is?
This is kind of like the Fistamifel, are you humble? But I'll give my best.
You're a very humble person.
Because I frankly think the answer to this is because my irregulars are very intricate. Okay. I don't really know how to say that any other way.
Well, you could just say you studied them for a long time, so you seem to have a good grasp on it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's not bragging. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
Speaking of studying something for a long time, we'll go with Canty's question first. Turg, what got you into rhythm games?
Sure. So I've been playing piano since I was 5 years old, and I don't know, music is not something that is foreign to me in the slightest. And also, I'm from a family, raised in a family of total nerds and software developers. So that combination, I did go and I played video games a lot. I went to the arcade a lot as a kid, back when arcades like existed and were for kids, as opposed to they were only in bars. But that's pretty much how it is nowadays. Yeah. So I'd go.
Those are the kids of today, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get it. I actually do get it. But that's a whole nother can of worms.
Anyways, sorry.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Anyways, for a long time, it was retro games, it was fighting games, it was brawlers like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was a really popular brawler where it's kind of Battletoads-esque, but Battletoads is an NES game. I don't know if anybody even knows what I'm talking about. But the pinball shooters like House of the Dead. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, this game came out that it's hard to really it's really hard to say just how different this was from everything else because now there's dozens upon dozens upon dozens of different rhythm games, let alone different genres I haven't even mentioned that weren't in arcades yet. But I saw a DDR machine, and within 1 second of it, I was like, I need to play this. Oh my gosh. It's a music game you play with your feet. No one told, no one had to tell me. No one was like, you need to play this. I know some people were self-conscious. They didn't want to make a fool of them. I needed to play.
Okay.
The first time we were at the arcade for an hour, and all 1 hour of that, I was either playing or in line to play again. And I was dripping in sweat and because I was out of shape, and I loved it. I loved every second of it. It actually got me in shape later, which is really
Good.
nice. Yeah, I that's it. I was just so amazed. And it's just kind of a silly thing nowadays with so many genres, but I never even thought of music video games. Such a
Right.
novel concept to me.
Uh, Niverio asked a similar question. He says, "You're known to be a very hardcore gamer, playing thousands and thousands of hours of different styles of games. Even in previous setting discussions, you've made analogies between gaming and puzzles to provide more unique insights. Do you think your experience in gaming actually benefits you in terms of puzzle setting and its philosophies? If yes, how so?" That's a very long question, Mario.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's a perfectionism. I've touched on this a little bit. So there's different ingredients in this soup. I love food analogies. One of them very much is insecurity. Honestly, it really is. Is that I don't like to be bad at things. I didn't learn how to lose very well.
Hmm.
It's a character flaw, something I need to work on. But some of it's insecurity. Some of it's this. I grew up in a household where games weren't a nerd thing; they were just a thing. They were even a social thing. It wasn't, oh, you just put the kids on the computers so that they don't cause trouble. We'd play video games together. We would swap turns playing like Jordan Mechner's Prince of Persia from 1990. And if one person died, we'd swap chairs and get in it. And oh man, so between video games being just so normalized in how I was raised
Hmm.
and my own frankly borderline pathological perfectionism, it's almost the only way I can play games. I don't really want to. Ooh, I don't want to give numbers of how many hours I've put into games. Whatever you're thinking, it's higher though, and that's because if a game comes out, I can't play the game unless I complete it. I don't even start up the menu unless I get the platinum trophy and I become one of the best speedrunners in the category. I don't even play the game. And that's so unhealthy, but that's who I am.
So you wouldn't even
And
try a game if you didn't have a chance at being that, is what you're saying?
yes, it's why I don't play shooters. I don't play shooters at all because I don't know. I don't think my vision is like my literal eyesight. I don't think it's good
Right.
enough. So I just don't play them like at all. But yeah, I think that does tie into Sudoku because I forgot even who I asked. I remember asking a question that's going to sound so nebulous, but it made sense in my head. I asked another setter, like, okay, what are the deductions in Arrow?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, isn't that a weird question to ask? And yet, I needed to know because I was never going to make an Arrow puzzle until I knew everything that everybody knew and then tried to come up with something else as well.
Right.
So
I
it's a bit
think
unhealthy.
in a weird way, that seems very similar to what Clover had said in her interview about which kinds of puzzles she solves. She likes to call contest puzzles because she wants to understand the base of knowledge of a constraint before she starts using it,
Yeah,
which is
actually,
interesting.
yes. I resonate a lot with what Clover says. There's a couple things that I disagree with, and that's fine. We're different
Yeah.
people, but 90%. I'd say I resonate with. And the other 10% is I'm just slightly more evil. I know it. I'm more willing to waste your time.
Interesting.
uh,
Speaking of evil, we'll get on the topic of Chronicles. First asking
yeah.
his more important question. Who's your favorite Chronicles?
It's probably Gurkles is my favorite
Oh,
Gurkles.
okay, okay, gotcha.
I'm Team Gurkles mainly because I like to say Gurk, and that's actually what I'll
Gotcha.
even type sometimes. When I say Grok, that's a word to me because it is a
Right,
word. It doesn't sound like a person,
like a
so
name.
I
Okay,
say Gurkles. Yeah, Gurk.
interesting. And then his slightly more serious question. Uh, what is a question that you've always wanted to answer, but no one has ever asked?
Okay, I've actually thought about this a lot and haven't come up with the most satisfying answer. It's an interesting meta question. It's a difficult one. More or less, he's giving me carte blanche to just blab about whatever I
Yeah.
want in an interesting way. Sure, I'll just blab about whatever I want, and you can pretend it's framed the way that he did. So, what's important to me is something that I don't see talked about a lot. I have seen it come up. It's not like it'll never come up, but I don't see it talked about a lot. And that is, I want to know all of the common variants. It's not even that I'm following trends, because oftentimes I'll make one, maybe two puzzles in it, and I'll move on if I don't like it. So I guess that's following trends. A lot of them don't hit LMD. It's not like they get archived. I just need to make it. I learn through making almost primarily. I get that, looking at other people's puzzles, solving other people's puzzles, looking at group solves. These can help, and I'm not going to pretend they can't. Me personally, I learn from doing far more efficiently, I think. Obviously, I can't come up with everything. I have to supplement it, but far more efficiently, I think I learn from doing. So, I have to know all of the common constraints. I have to. So, pick a famous constraint. I've probably made a puzzle with it.
Hmm.
There's probably only a few exceptions of that. 159 is the one that comes to mind. I've never made a 159. It's because I hate indexing. Uh, I'm allowed. I am not saying indexing is bad. I've never said that. I'm saying I hate it, and I'm allowed to hate it. It feels robotic to me. I don't know
Hmm.
why. It does. Uh, Turg not allowed to hate. Sorry. Oh no.
Um, and that was the answer to what question?
Oh, okay. So the question for that is, why don't you specialize in Sudoku variants? Why is it that it seems like you said a lot? I had to even think about the question. I guess that would be the question.
That's an
There's a
interesting
few other
question.
people. Obviously, Sam, Clover, and Philip can obviously say this too. Gas
Yeah.
setters very much can say this, but more or less, I don't think it's common, even in the CTC community, to be like, I've set 75 Sudoku variants. That's probably not the most common thing.
No, probably not. Um,
I just don't like to not know. I don't like to feel ignorant.
so in the sort of devil advocate's way, if you had to specialize in one variant and not set anything else, what would you do?
Sorry, my brain heard the words and did not process that as a sentence. Could you repeat that?
If you were forced to only set forever just one variant, what would you specialize in?
That sounds nightmarish to me, especially just after the question I answered.
Yeah,
It would be thermo. It would be. I
cool.
I hate that. I hate that question because like I want to
You're
make other
welcome.
things, right?
Yes, absolutely. Um,
Little
I,
Killer Fortress Thermo. Little Killer and Fortress can work actually.
and we were just speaking about Clover, so I'll bring up this point that I actually forgot to write down, but I remember I wanted to ask you about. Um, I think you were in the camp of you would make puzzles if you were the only person on Earth.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. Um, I am the primary audience of all my puzzles.
Hmm.
This can come off of arrogant, but that's one viewpoint. I don't think it's the right vantage point. It's less about me praising the puzzle and more about a quest for knowledge, a personal journey. I I like to learn. I love learning. And to me, setting puzzles is learning completely. So, well, okay. So I've made over 1,000 puzzles.
Right.
And if you look at all my pencil puzzles, all my testing in CTC, all of my features that some of them weren't in testing, all my speed setting that definitely weren't in testing, you're going to come up with a number like 450. So where did the other 550 go? I made them and didn't release them. That's over half my puzzles.
Right.
So I just like setting. It's really fun.
I really cringe at every time Jovi says, and she says it quite often, so it's a nightmare. That she makes puzzles often and just closes the tab and just moves on.
I think there's different reasons to make puzzles.
Uh-huh.
I know where you're coming from, and I won't pretend that there isn't a twinge of sadness when I hear it too sometimes. But I can relate to her on some levels because I have done the same. And there's different reasons why you would do that. The most obvious reason is you think the puzzle is trash.
Right.
And sometimes it is, by the
Yeah.
way. You can make bad puzzles.
It's
It's
fun to
totally
make bad
possible.
puzzles. It is.
Oh yeah, I put them in VC. No, like I do. It's my VC puzzles are usually bad as a warning. Not always. Some of them are kind of cute actually, but
Yeah.
they're usually bad. Oh, hold on. There we go.
So you
But
clearly
yes.
enjoy. Sorry, go ahead.
So that being said, if the puzzle you think is actually decent, you have to ask yourself a question. Everybody does. I just don't know if it's conscious that the question is being asked, and that is, do other people need to see this and why? Yeah, I don't think that's a consciously asked question, but on a subconscious level, it somewhat is. So that is an interesting one that'll get you in an existential crisis if you get too stuck on that one. You start thinking about what the value of puzzles is. I think puzzles have value, by the way. I'm not suggesting they don't.
Hmm.
Then you start wondering, it's like, yeah, but is there value in my puzzles? Yeah, don't go down
Right.
that road. Just make puzzles. Just just make puzzles. Every single one of us in the chat who's a setter has made at least one puzzle that they aren't perfectly happy with. That's part of setting. It's fine. It doesn't mean you need to be particularly ashamed of it, I think.
Hmm.
But yes, I have closed puzzles because sometimes I do it just to learn. A lot
Right.
of the puzzles that you'll never see the light of day, it's because I wanted to learn the rule set. That was the entire goal.
Right.
So that doesn't need to be public.
So you clearly find enjoyment in the setting process. Do you think you find more enjoyment in setting than you do solving puzzles?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so solving to me, I have three very different experiences with solving.
Okay.
One of them is what I like to call newspaper Sudoku.
Right.
And they're not always in newspapers. They could be on online or even apps nowadays. But newspaper Sudoku is usually auto-gen, easy to medium classics. I have solved literally 5 digits of these, as I said earlier in the interview. That's not an exaggeration. I have no problem with these. They're fairly mindless, they're zen, and they actually can very much help with scanning and speed. So
Right.
there's even some utility there if you want to improve. I, to this day, will still solve newspaper Sudoku.
Interesting.
Next will be pencil puzzles, and I tend to solve on Puzzlink, and I've solved thousands of those. And it's similar, but almost always there's a bit more thought process because I've just done Sudoku for longer. So
Mm-hmm.
that's like it's not fully Zen anymore, but I'm not usually taxed. I'm not usually really
Right.
sweating bullets to try and solve some of these puzzles. A few of them on Puzzlink are very hard, don't get me
Right.
wrong. But if I'm honest, I will just give up and do an easier puzzle half the time. Not always. Sometimes I have a sunk cost fallacy. I'm like, no, I got to do this. Walker's Sloop is a good example. I will shout out Walker. Walker made a 75 by 75 sloop, and I just had to solve it. Took me forever.
Gosh, that sounds
It's
awful.
actually a good puzzle. It's an amazing construction because all the shades are pentominoes. It's super impressive if you've never
Hmm.
seen it. But yeah, it's hard. It takes a long time. Only try this if you have free time. But then the last is going to be essentially the CTC feature bait. And I'm not even trying to be mean when I say this. So that's a lot of the puzzles on LMD. It's a lot of the puzzles in Sudoku testing. Clearly, it's pretty much everything featured. I will still solve these.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I feel like I solved several this week and DM'd people. I'm like, hey, this is a good path. But of the three, if I'm being completely honest, I enjoy these the least, and I feel guilty about enjoying these least. But I absolutely do, because the way I work is I build up skills through repetition. This is
Mm-hmm.
true in so many aspects of my life. But most of the time, certainly not always, but most of the time, people are trying to have new setups or novel logic or just a new rule set.
Right.
My reputation has been thrown out the window, and it's a very humbling experience to me. And it doesn't mean I can't solve. I am nowhere near the strongest solver. Nowhere near. I'm not a bad solver. I'm not a bad solver. But usually by the time I'm done, I have one of two thoughts. One of them is like, wow, that was actually really good. And this
Mm-hmm.
does happen more than half the time. But there is a non insignificant amount that's like, I'm glad that's over.
Right.
And I hate to say that because I want to be super positive, but that is true to me.
Yeah. I mean, it happens to me sometimes too. So it's not like it's a rare thing. Um, is there like what makes you want to solve something? Maybe specifically from that group, because I think pencil puzzles. It's not like, oh, I look at the grid and I'm like, I don't want to solve that pencil puzzle. Um,
No, I just click the next one down the
Yeah,
page like every
exactly.
time.
So what makes you not want to solve something that you see in the sort of feature bait, as you say, versus solve it? Like,
With how few I solve compared to some other setters in CTC, I'm actually going to slightly change the wording to what makes me want to solve.
okay, yeah,
Because I'm not trying to be, a contrarian. So what
yeah,
makes me want to solve usually is rule sets I'm familiar with, and upon 10 seconds of looking at the grid, it's not a setup I recognize.
hmm,
That's interesting. Rule sets that I'm familiar with a twist that is not common. So it's not just doublers are a really good example of this, to be fair, but it's not just thermo; it's parity thermo. It's not just crop key; it's portal crop key. By the way, portal crop key totally exists. There's at least one puzzle. It's super crazy. It's not just arrow; it's toroidal arrow.
right,
Not just skyscraper. Yeah, this stuff that's intriguing to me.
hmm,
What's less intriguing to me is both three paragraph rule sets. I'm currently setting a puzzle and will be for a while. That is like a three paragraph rule set. I'm not completely against. Death even had a fairly long-ish rule set. It wasn't
right,
three paragraphs, but it was like one really big paragraph.
hmm,
So I'm not against longer rule sets. I'm not. But it is a bit off-putting to me personally. I know some people. I'll name him. I know KNT loves this stuff. Like he lives for it. So clearly there's an audience. There really is, and a lot of these puzzles get solved with very high ratings. So I'm not even trying to say that this is bad. Me personally, that's intimidating. It's daunting to me
Right.
because there's a lot of, and this is something Clover said. I want to even say back in her setting video
Hmm.
about there's a lot of mental energy in just trying to remember it.
Yeah.
And that's going to slow you down a lot because
Hmm.
invariably, unless you are far more brilliant than I, you're going to have to reference that rule set a couple times during the solve.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So speaking of what you're willing to solve, is there any specific setters that you normally solve from when you're like looking for something to solve or looking for inspiration?
Honestly, no.
No.
So some of my friends will absolutely be like, hey, test this. Hey,
Yeah.
solve this. That's a little different. That's not really what you're asking. So yeah, I often will.
Hmm.
Usually, I won't say always. There have definitely been times I haven't, but usually, yeah. But that's not really what you're asking. That's somebody being like, hey, we're familiar with each other. We know that we like each other's puzzles. I mean, not to name names, but Gurkles and I will test each other's puzzles. He even brought this up. That is true. He's better at it than I am. I am the worst puzzle friend. He will do like every single one of my puzzles, and I'll do like 60% of his puzzles. It's still over half.
Yeah.
Hey, uh, but yeah,
He makes more puzzles anyways.
I actually, if I'm being honest, and there's a few posts you can I don't know, you can fact check this if you want.
Hmm.
I kind of like solving really amateur puzzles. Like,
Hmm.
it's fascinating to me, really fascinating because there are what we would sometimes call mistakes, but what a mistake is really really hard to define in puzzle setting. But there's also ideas that are unpolluted, if you will,
Yeah.
by the norms of trends.
Hmm.
So yeah, you'll look at something that this thermo literally just doesn't need to be here. And it's not that it's even making a deduction easier,
Right. It's
it's
just,
doing almost nothing.
yeah. It was doing
But
something before maybe, but now it's not.
yeah, it's doing almost nothing. But this cage made me do algebra, and this is his second puzzle, or their second puzzle. That's cool.
Yeah.
And so I actually often seek out novice setters. If I go for someone that I know, um, almost every time, and I've told him this, so this won't be a shock to him. I will look at a Zeta Math puzzle and I'll say to myself, "It'll be this time. This is the time that it's really going to click for me." I've solved like 3 of them successfully because Zeta Math and I think very differently.
Right.
I respect him to the nth degree. What an amazing setter. And he can solve my puzzles. I can't solve his, so I would definitely say he's more clever than I.
Interesting. Uh, I think it's interesting that you mentioned the novice setter thing. I actually have been I haven't had a lot of time recently, so I've been looking when I go to test puzzles and testing submissions, I look at how many puzzles the person has posted since that puzzle. And if they've posted less than 5, then I'll definitely do a puzzle because
Yeah, it's fun
yeah.
actually. Well, it's fun for 2 reasons because I think the Cogito in like a a group discussion talked about this a long
Yeah.
time ago. That sometimes established setters can get traffic, and there is an economy of time. We can pretend there's not, but there is.
There definitely is.
So there isn't an infinite amount of time for an infinite amount of solvers to solve solves. So there's a little bit of a vacuum effect when really popular setters post puzzles. They'll
Mhm.
get 8 solves, even though it's a fairly difficult puzzle. And the easy puzzle before it could have 3 solves. And you're like,
Right.
that's unfortunate. And you kind of want to solve that easier puzzle. One, it probably won't take you that long. But 2, I just remember when I found the CTC Discord, the first, I love pointing this out because he doesn't remember. That's actually the funniest part. The first feedback I ever got was from Eric Fox.
Interesting.
Literally, the first one ever. And Eric was like, pretty decent. Here's what we're done at Clue. I don't know. Okay, flow. And for him, it was, standard run of the mill. He's been doing this
Yeah.
for years. But to me, I'm like, oh, dude, it's the creator of F puzzles. And it kind of made my day.
Right. That's pretty rare to see a Eric solve these days. Um, is there any specific puzzles that you've solved in your whole career that have had a massive impact on how you view puzzles?
Whew. Uh,
I mean, you mentioned the Pentagonist by Steph, but
yeah, well, that one is actually the best example, in all honesty. I was thinking Sudoku, but
yeah.
that really is one of the. If you haven't seen this puzzle, you you really need to. Paulcat has a good point that I used to follow that. I've slipped, but that's a really good rule of thumb. Test 3 or 4 puzzles for everyone I post. I actually think that's really good for the community. I
Mhm.
have been slipping, but it's good. Let me think. Let me think. The problem is, it's not that I think everybody's puzzles aren't great. It's
Yeah.
that I don't solve probably as many as I should. And then some of my favorite puzzles, I won't say that I really was indirectly inspired,
Right.
absolutely, but directly inspired, not as much. So I would say the number series by Clover is actually pretty good because I had a very basic understanding of killer before that. And those killers are more basic in general than the sense of place killers
Yeah.
later in her career. But I learned a lot from that. I was like, it was kind of a eureka moment on just how little I knew about killer.
Hmm.
And I taught myself. I don't in any way, shape, or form think I'm great at killer, but it was actually important to me to not be bad because it's like it's probably the most versatile rule set. I said it. I even said earlier that if I had to pick only one, I'd pick thermal. I'll stand by that. But killer is probably the most versatile rule set. It's hard to think of anything you can't do with thermal. I mean, with killer. Killer's
Yeah.
powerful.
I think. Ugh, stupid bots.
Stupid bots.
Um. Sorry. Yeah. I think Killer would be my answer to that question. Just to answer that before we even get to that. But
Or you're interviewed by Meme Ritzer.
yeah, for meme reads or whatever we want to call them, would probably answer that. Anyways, so moving from solving puzzles to setting puzzles, which of your puzzles do you feel was most important for your development as a setter that you have set?
Okay, for like the two people that know the story behind this puzzle, they're going to be like, wait, really? And I actually am being serious. In a lot of ways, that's going to be Archer's Prison, which is a collaboration between me and Nityant. And the reason that was so impactful for me was I had to give up control in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. And that it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot. Also, I released a puzzle that had a deduction that I didn't initially understand,
Hmm.
which was also a weird feeling. So I put it in a cage, and there was logic to the cage. It was one of the two 5 cell 19s, which to this day is my favorite cage. And then he puts on a 5 cell 19 directly on top of it. Then he's like, oh, this does this. And he just sees it instantly. And he had to walk me through what it did. By the way, this was featured, and this was also the sticking point for Simon. It's not an easy deduction.
Hmm.
But that taught me a lot in a way because, and I cheated. I so cheated your question because I picked a puzzle of mine and still picked another setter. Haha.
Yeah.
But
It's okay. You answered the other
I,
question.
yeah, I cheated. Um, but yeah, what I learned about that was one, I got better at working with others.
Hmm.
Two, I got better at having to think about the economy of space because in how we were collabing, not only did I think about the clue I was placing, but much like a game of pool, I'm not just shooting my balls. I
Hmm.
also have to make sure that the cue
Right.
ball ends up in a weird position for them. I have to think like a move ahead. So I have to place my clue, but I also have to think about what clues could complement that and
Hmm.
what space is left for him to place a clue. So yeah, I learned a lot from that one. Literally mixing geometry and arithmetic.
Sorry, I spent way too much time trying to find the
That's all
puzzle
good.
for this.
My favorite cheese is a poise, which, yeah, it's a very controversial cheese, but it is my favorite.
Interesting. What is the most Tyrgannus-like puzzle you've made? What puzzle sort of encapsulates your setting style?
The difficulty with this one is that my early setting career and my current setting career are nearly opposite. I did read this question, and this was a hard one for me, so I might actually have to give you two puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is Galaga. Galaga was my first speed setting one, and this, in a lot of ways, is a very early Tyrg puzzle, like a very early Tyrg puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Archer's Prison did start the doxing Tyrgannus joke. So the reason this is super early Tyrg is it does some things that I just wouldn't do. I don't think the logic is bad. Even in a lot of my old puzzles, I'm somewhat happy with the solve path. Some of them I'm not. I don't need to reveal which ones.
It's okay.
But look, it has a thermo that's like dips into a cage. It has weird 2-cell thermal spiders. The spider things aren't perfectly symmetrical. The killer cages at the top aren't perfectly symmetrical. It's busy. Almost every single cell is. Yeah, this is my speed setting puzzle. Almost every single cell is clued. Now that I've said a bunch of negatives, I legitimately think that the logic in this puzzle is good. I'm very proud of myself for coming up with this with as little time as I did, and it does have a aesthetic theme. It's a Galaga ship,
Right.
so I don't think it's a bad puzzle. I really don't. This is very old Tyrgannus, and I don't really set like this anymore.
Right.
For new Tyrgannus, and you're going to laugh that to the untrained eye, this is actually going to look very similar, but I would say that's terminal velocity. It's from my LMD.
Yeah.
Throwing them curveballs because I'm mentioning puzzles I didn't talk about DMs.
No, it's okay.
So, terminal velocity. Yeah, to me, this is so much cleaner. Ooh. Yeah. Okay, so, one, it, I love this puzzle so much. I'm so sorry. It's like
It's
my
okay.
baby. Okay, so this one, the killer cages are 100% perfectly symmetrical. And then the arrows are take up cells that are perfectly symmetrical but have a different aesthetic theme. But that aesthetic theme complements the killer cages. No clues overlap, unlike Galaga.
Right.
And here's the coolest part. This is a spoiler for the solve path. I'm not going to give it all away. If you want to solve
Don't worry
this,
about it.
mute for like 10 seconds. I'll say it quickly. This is a puzzle that looks like it's filled with swordfish. There aren't any swordfish. That makes me so happy that I pulled that off because it is an intentional red herring.
This puzzle kind of almost resonates with the thing you said before, where you use set to set something but don't actually use it. This looks like you could use set with it.
This is a perfect example.
Yes.
Well, I used set to set it.
Yeah,
But you don't
set to set.
set to solve it.
Set to set, set, not set to solve.
Sorry.
Set.
This was not made for the red herrings prompt, but I wish I did this for the red herrings prompt because this is a perfect example of a red herring puzzle. I should have put this in the red herrings prompt.
Okay, well, Ambrose wants to solve it, so we'll move on before it gets spoiled.
Okay.
Zetamath had asked a similar question to this, but not quite the same question. He said, of all the puzzles you've set, which do you think is your best and which is your favorite? And those are different things, apparently.
My favorite's terminal velocity.
Okay, there we go.
My best
Easy.
is Myliobatoide.
Oh, what is that?
Myliobatoide is another LMD puzzle. And I can explain why this is my best.
It's right before terminal velocity.
Well, yeah, I was at a look at the
On a
ratings in
roll.
that section too. I was on a roll. I actually was. I was inspired at that point in life.
Oh, it actually isn't
So
right before. It was just a different one that I clicked on.
so the reason that I think this is my best puzzle. Oh, it's not right before. You're right. So the reason that this I think is my best puzzle is it does it does things that I actually aren't particularly indicative, and I'm literally leading into another question I know was asked of me. It's not particularly indicative of my style, and that's it absolutely has a break-in. You would be pulling teeth to solve this puzzle without the intended first thing. But in my mind, this is a really good telegraphing of the intended thing, and I have gotten quite a few DMs complimenting the break-in. So I'm really proud of this one. The reason that terminal velocity is my favorite is every reason that I was talking about it before. But I do think that this is in many ways cleaner. It's more minimal without me trying to be minimal.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful because I actually made a stingray. Myliobatoidae is the it's like the family. It's not the genus. It's one of the kingdom, phylum, class
Yeah.
order family. It's one of them for stingrays, and it's supposed to look like a stingray. It's a really good puzzle, just in every way, and it's only a 3. But I actually think, in many ways, this is my best puzzle.
Interesting. Well, leading into that other question, Directionary asks, I'm going to put out an old setting video on CTC, or pull out the old setting video on CTC. You said that your break-ins are usually not too hard, and you usually put the hardest sections in the middle, and then reward the solver in the end. Do you still abide by this? How has your setting changed over the last year and a half since making that video?
Well, my setting's changed a lot, and we've even touched on that a little. So I'll answer that, but I'll get to that second.
Okay.
Do I still abide by this? Absolutely. That being said, I've gotten them slightly more lenient. I have, because every now and then I just have it's the sub. Okay, suborder. Suborder. Cool. Every now and then I have a really good idea that doesn't really work if you already have like pointing pairs or singles even vaguely looking at this.
Right.
And then I have to put it as the break-in. Well, I don't have to, but I kind of do. So that's happened a couple times. It's not common for me. I can cite some puzzles where I actually think the break-in is the hardest part of my puzzles. But yeah, it's not that common. I really like easing in, and the reason that I like easing in is because I like to teach. I've never been a teacher, a paid teacher. I don't think I'm as eloquent as some people, but I do like to teach, and this is a medium for me to teach.
Right.
So sometimes I want to give you, maybe not trivial, but a spottable, that's a good word. I'll give you a spottable deduction of the theme of what I want you to later apply. And then later I want you to apply it in a far more complex way.
Right.
And you need an ease in and then a chunk in the middle, really, in order to pull that off. So I still really like doing that. It's my favorite way to set a puzzle.
Definitely. And this sort of a way that you set a puzzle to make it sort of ease into it, I think goes along really well with the Rock Rat Zero question of accepting the premise that puzzles should be fun to solve. What makes a puzzle fun? How can the setter ensure funsies in their puzzles, is what he says.
Okay, well, I'm going to be controversial and say puzzles don't need to be fun to solve. But I will humor that. I'll only briefly touch onto that, but puzzles can be made for many reasons. One of them could be a nerd snipe. Nerd snipe puzzles are rarely meant to be fun. Some of them are. White Room is a perfect example. It's brought up a lot. But a lot of nerd snipe puzzles, Sixth Dimension, that was brought up earlier, is a nerd snipe puzzle. It's not fun. It's not a fun puzzle. Nerd snipe puzzles are rarely fun, but I think they're pretty cool. So yeah, there's different reasons to make puzzles. I think most puzzles are meant to be fun. So I understand, and let's get back to the normal question. I think you don't want to frustrate your solvers. we all have different concepts and different tolerances to what frustrates us. So there's no
Right.
one catch-all answer. For me personally, what I think is I set puzzles that vaguely correspond to what I like to do. I think a lot of people do this. So for me, I would rather do something at the 3 difficulty version and then later do it at the 4 difficulty version. That is always going to be more fun to me because I always have this aha moment when I see the harder one. Because it's like, wait, I think I know how to do this. Oh, I don't know if I know how to do this. I kind of know how to do this. And that's actually really fun to me.
That does sound fun. Speaking of, I think solvers who might have been frustrated, FJam had asked a question. I really enjoyed the Revelations pack you made with Grockles. Pestilence and Famine were good. Death was fantastic, but who do I blame for war?
If you want the honest answer, and there are receipts, you mostly have to blame Gurkles, but I think I don't want to rake him under the bus because the way it worked was Pestilence was made entirely by me.
Okay.
Famine was made entirely by Gurkles. And then Death was made super collaboratively. Like, meticulous. That one took a long time. Like, whatever you're thinking longer, that one... 10 days?
We'll just show that on the screen here. It's... Yeah. It's... yeah.
Yeah, I didn't stop him. That's true. Oh, yeah, I'm partially to blame. Don't get me wrong. War, the way it worked was a kind of a different allocation of labor. And that was, Urkels had an idea for a puzzle. And to be fair, the pack is supposed to be hard. That was said. We weren't tricking people. We did say it even in the post that this was, you know, an intentionally challenging pack. So he's like, I have a really hard break-in. I was like, okay, well, how hard can it be? And he sent me the break-in. I want to say 6 days later, I'm like, I think I understand it. It was so bad. And then I actually helped resolve puzzle and actually work on that. But the first deduction is mostly entirely Gurkles. And that's the part that destroys people.
6 days, you know. Let's go from that, which is a very, interesting topic, to where did the name Tyrgannus come from?
Yeah, okay. So, I am a nerd that has played video games all my life. And
has been established, yes.
Yes. And at 14 years old, I needed to make a character in a tactically unnamed MMO.
Okay.
And I wanted to draw in from mythologies and maybe also just, let's go super origin story, but also just have it sound kind of cool. So I came up with the Norse god, sometimes called the Norse god of war, but the more you look into Norse mythology, that's maybe not the most accurate way to word it, and that's Tyr, T-Y-R.
Yeah.
And then I knew that I was going to be playing for a long time. So you have the Latin word for year, and that's the G just makes it flow. It just sounds good. Tyrannus, it's too on the nose. I just sound like, well, isn't that a Star Wars character, Darth Tyrannus? So I couldn't be that. So I needed another letter. There it is, Tyrgannus.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so what's your biggest puzzling regret? Is there any puzzles you'd like to redo or take back?
A few. Genome. I said it.
Naverio loves it so much.
So Genome is my biggest puzzle regret, and it's not for the reasons you think, because for people that, you know, have watched my LMD page like a hawk, they might think it's discombobulated. Because discombobulated is the only puzzle I have pulled from LMD. That's because I made a logical leap, and it was entirely unfair. It was actually still unique, but it was entirely unfair. I pulled it from LMD. So the reason this is a regret is not the reason you think. It's not because I made a logical leap. I didn't make a logical leap. I just set... There was a tester someone who did a lot of this is related. There was someone who tested a lot of CTC's puzzles really quickly and did the hardest puzzles in testing without fail. Named Ogi or OG. I don't exactly know how
The
pronounce
OG.
it. Oh, it was just OGI.
Okay.
I literally set this puzzle to stump him. That's literally was the reason. I'm not even lying, and I'm kind of not proud of that. And the problem is, and this made me feel even worse, is I did.
Oh
Is
no.
I don't exactly. I felt so bad. So I made this puzzle to stump him. I did, and then I didn't feel good about it. I felt almost empty inside because I kind of. Sam said something like, "You want to, you want to, even in an adversarial setting, you make a challenge, but you want to gracefully lose to the solver." I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I deep down inside, that's actually what I wanted. So when it didn't happen, I felt bad. I thought I made a mistake. And then Gurkle solved it, TNC solved it, Glum Hippo solved it. And I'm like, okay, I don't think I made a mistake. I mean, it's brutal.
Yeah.
This is a 6 out of 5. So I put it on LMD, and it has a decent rating. And a lot of the really strong solvers, not named Nevario, actually like the puzzle. Nevario hates this puzzle. But it's kind of a big regret. I set it for the wrong reasons. I set it to stump somebody, and that's kind of a rude thing to do.
Definitely. Definitely not why we set puzzles usually.
Yeah, I don't recommend it.
Okay. We have 10 minutes left, so I'll go through the rapid fire questions before we run out of time. I'll just ask a question, one answer it or the other. Barely any time to think about it. Local or global deductions?
Local.
Coloring or good living?
Coloring, but by less than you think.
Geometry or arithmetic?
Geometry, but by less than you think.
Interesting. Penpa or F puzzles?
I am an F puzzle stan.
Okay. Sudokus or pencil puzzles?
I plead the fifth.
Okay. Chaos or order?
Chaos.
Cages,
Chaos.
lines, or dots?
Cages. Though I do like dots. I do.
To disambiguate a puzzle, a given or a clue?
A given is a clue. I had to. If I have to disambiguate because there's just a deadly pattern left, I have to rewind. I have to do something better.
If you have to put a given in, you mean?
No, I have givens in some of my puzzles. You can even see them in the background.
Yeah.
But if I have to put a clue just to disambiguate something at the end, I messed up. I did something wrong.
Okay, interesting. There's one more question I really wanted to get to. Collaborative setting. What value have you gotten from collaborative setting experiences?
A ton. I've learned a lot. Okay, so I always learn, but the lessons can be different. One, it could be a lesson in humility and patience. And other times, it could very much be learning team building and deductions I wouldn't have thought of. That's one of the biggest ones. I know it seems very solitary, but just we all have different brains.
Yeah.
And no matter how long I practice, and I'm gonna practice, no matter how long I practice, I'm not gonna be able to come up with everything myself. I'm human. So that is one of the good things about you can spend 8 hours on a rule set, hanging your head against the wall. Somebody will come in and be like, well, why didn't you do this? Like, because it's perfect. I don't know. Thank you. Learning is the best part.
Definitely. Where do your ideas come from? What's your source of inspiration?
Curiosity. Almost every single puzzle has a question behind it. Some of them are more humble than others. but a lot of the questions are just like, uh, can I set this in a way that forms a bunch of X-wings?
Right.
Some of them are a bit more ridiculous, like, can I set a puzzle that absolutely looks like it's roped and isn't? The answer is yes, but that's harder to do, by the way.
Right.
So there's almost always a core question.
Hmm.
So it's curiosity. And then because of that, that's actually part of the reason I like setting so much and I set for me a lot is I just want to answer the question.
Hmm. Interesting. Um,
There's a classic question in there right at the end.
oh yeah, there was a classic question. I'm not sure if you want
I
to
forgot
answer
who asked. Oh,
that
I do want
one.
to answer. I do
Okay,
want to answer it.
Logan Wall asks, what is your favorite classic deduction you've ever used in one of your own puzzles, and what's your favorite that you've seen in someone else's puzzles but have not used yourself?
Okay, so the first one is going to be an XY ring. I did that in a variant Sudoku called Oyster. Oyster is bottom row, fourth from the right, the one that looks like playing with an oyster. I don't know. Uh, and it uses an XY ring, and I was actually really happy about that. I thought it was cool. But it does it in a way that isn't most expected, and its interactions with the long thermo I thought were pretty cool, actually. But the coolest ones ever is always going to be in classics and not variant Sudokus.
Hmm.
And they're going to be things that don't necessarily have names. But if you tried to put a name, they would be like perpendicularly offset multifish.
Yeah.
I know that Jovi's probably now cringing, but they don't really have names, and that's vaguely close. Those are so cool. I don't always see them. Sometimes I do. Um, and then, oh man, they're so cool. Ooh, they're so cool.
Okay. Is there any piece of advice you received early on in your setting career that really helped you develop as a setter?
This is so basic, but you have to understand that everybody starts everywhere, and that
Yes,
is
please.
don't start from a solved grid. That's
Yes.
all
Okay.
you want. But I was one of the people that needed to hear that.
Yeah, totally.
So what that did nearly overnight was that I had to build either one clue at a time, or I'm going to amend my statement for my setting video, 2 or 3 clues at a time, because oftentimes you build an interaction, not just
Hmm.
a singular clue. So a small amount of clues at a time, and then you solve it as you go. And every now and then it breaks, and that's fine. It breaks. But before that, that's not what I was doing. I was definitely going from like a solved grid because I knew it wouldn't break that way, and puzzles just
Right.
weren't nearly as good.
Yeah, exactly. Um, that's a great piece of advice. Is there any piece of advice you often hear nowadays that you disagree with?
Advice, not advice so much as philosophy.
Okay.
I do hear people talking about that's been done.
Hmm.
And those 3 words are the most destructive 3 words to our community. You're going to have a hard time convincing me otherwise. Because, sure, somebody's done it, but you haven't. Well, maybe you haven't. And at the end of the day, a community isn't really only a collective. It's a collective and it's a group of individuals. We're all on personal
Hmm.
journeys. So just because somebody has done something, my goodness, you haven't done it. You might not understand the intricacies and nuances of it. And doing it, you're going to learn. You're going to be a
Yeah,
better setter.
definitely. It's even, I think, Zeta Math has said before that if you want to start setting, a good idea would be to sort of try to recreate a puzzle that you love by setting it, um, like recreate the ideas in a different way. Um, and that's
Okay.
basically just doing the exact same puzzle. He didn't say to like release that, but just to practice setting. And I think doing something that you've seen before is a great way to learn how to set. Learning
Yes,
how to set something up from scratch.
absolutely. Um, we're allowed to actually have the same deductions.
Yes.
Maybe try to put it in a different setup, but
Yeah.
even then, I'm not the setup police.
Yeah.
But
I don't know who the setup police is, but I hope they don't set you up. Um,
setup.
are you a cop? Uh,
I know we're winding down.
yes. How do you come up with your puzzle names? And what's your best puzzle name?
Oh, my best. Okay, I'm literally not even just saying this for my memes. My best puzzle name was named by Jovial, and that's
Hmm.
Genome. I'm literally not even saying that for the name. It's such a good name for the
It
puzzle.
is, yeah, it's a good
It
name.
really is. Good job, Jovial. That being said, the best that I've come up with, I'd have to check my receipts, but I do think it was me. In some ways, is gonna be pestilence, war, famine, and death. I believe I
Yeah.
came up with the theme, and I just love those names. We actually tried, believe it or not, to have the rule sets slightly uh,
Mm.
work with the names. For instance, pestilence has disjoint, so the deductions are spreading everywhere. It has palindrome,
Ah,
so it's spreading everywhere. Famine is
interesting.
minimalistic. War, you have to go through a line, a blockade, and there's attrition. And death, well, death is a mystery. We actually
Right.
did think about this a lot.
Hmm. That's cool. That is really cool. Okay, that brings us to the 2 hour mark, and that's a great way to capstone the whole thing. Thank you so much, Tyrgannus, for coming out and talking with us for 2 hours, and thank you, chat, for sticking through it. Well, not sticking through it, I'm sure you were engaged the whole time. Uh, I apologize for leaving frame so many times during this interview because my cat was making interesting noises all around the house and then pretending he was fine, but it happens,
Okay.
you know. Um,
So
Hippo
we
Hippo showing up just at the end. Okay.
we gonna announce the next one.
Oh yes, yes. We are going to announce the next one. The next setter spotlight will be announced by yours truly, Tyrgannus.
So the already heavily requested, and I'm excited for it personally. Next interview will be Zeta Math. That should be fun.
And Tyrgannus knows that not because well because he's the setter and I asked him to announce it, but also because he's a patron and my Patreon supporters or Ko-Fi if you support me on Ko-Fi as well, will get these announcements way before everyone. Well, sometimes way before everyone, sometimes last minute. It varies in terms of what I know, but I usually tell them what I know, so they know who I have contacted. What is Ko-Fi? It is coffee. Okay, whatever, whatever. I pronounce it one way. Someone says another one. Yeah, Zach's the. I don't know if you guys know this, but Zach is the setter. Like he sets most of the puzzles, I think. I mean, we'll get into that, but anyways, uh,
Oh,
but yeah,
I think I think that's it.
that is a wrap. So if you are surprised by Zetamath and you want to know who else I've contacted and stuff, and you have extra income, support me on Patreon. Or if you can't support me on Patreon, subscribe because that's just as much the support. So, well, not just as much, but you're definitely doing me a service by subscribing and liking the video and commenting on all that thing that's good for the algorithm. So, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Bye.